Good morning. We're here with Mr. Roberto, UNICEF country representative in Mongolia. Thank you for accepting our invitation.
Thank you for having me.
Would you like to introduce yourself
Sure.
to our audiences?
Sure.
And tell us about your childhood and your career?
Well, my name is Roberto. I'm the UNICEF country representative in Mongolia. And I've been here for a bit more than a year and a half. So enough to start understanding a little bit what is around. And this is my 6th country with UNICEF. I've been serving children through UNICEF for almost 18 years. So I would say it's a big part of my professional life. I'm an Italian citizen, so I'm coming from the country of Marco Polo. I always say that when I'm here in Mongolia because it is also a country that has a deep affection and deep love to Mongolians and to the country.
Mm-hmm. And also, speaking of your experience, you've worked in many countries like Mexico, Indonesia, and Jordan in Africa. So how do you think they are different than Mongolians? How do you see the comparison between them?
Sure.
And what is the most important, strong first impression that you felt when you first came to Mongolia?
It's an interesting question because one of the beauties of being an international civil servant working for United Nations is that you have a chance to see different countries, and different countries are different and unique in their beauty, in their complexity. And you're very right. I saw different things moving from Ivory Coast and Senegal at the beginning, going to humanitarian emergency operations like the one after the tsunami in Indonesia, where I worked for 3 years. But also then moving to a very dynamic and fast-evolving country like Mexico, and then a complex world like the Middle East, right? Before and after the Syrian crisis. So I lived and worked in Jordan for 5 years. And what I see are some, of course, profound differences, but also some common points. And then once you are there, you learn that development is made by very simple, yet not necessarily easy ingredients. And I found these ingredients across the country. For example, in West Africa, I saw the importance of community and extended family, and the fact that community gets together to take care of each other, and people start helping each other in a very spontaneous way. When I moved to the Indonesia tsunami operation, the importance of disaster preparedness, and Mongolia is a country that is exposed to natural disaster. We just had the Zud here in the country. In Mexico, I learned the importance of the government initiative to support the vulnerable population through cash assistance. They have very important cash assistance program. And when I went to Jordan, what I learned is the importance of solidarity. The Jordanian government welcomed hundreds of thousands of refugees in their country. So being open, being part of the world, where the problem in one country also needs generosity in other countries. And then I came to Mongolia, and this is such a unique experience for me from all points of view, because this is a unique country. I always say one of a kind. And I feel privileged, fortunate, and blessed to live and work in Mongolia because I have access to something that is unique in its nature, unique in its culture, in its identity, in its society. So there are a lot of differences among countries. What I find common between Mongolia and the other countries is that most of the countries where I work were young in its society. 36% of Mongolians are under the age of 25. Huge potential. It's a huge driver for the future, for the better. So the importance of ensuring that this young part of population is a priority when we discuss the future of the society. This is common across all these countries.
And you've been living here in Mongolia for a year and a half.
Yes.
What is it like living in UB?
Well, I must say that I always say, joking, I'm a country boy. I'm coming from the Italian countryside. Well, so I really enjoy the countryside in Mongolia. So I must say that UB is a big city as many other big cities. It has its charm. But at the end of the day, the beauty, I believe that the beauty of the country is when you go out and you see the fantastic landscape. What I like of UB, I truly like, is that it's a vibrant city. Every week there is something new. So it's a city that doesn't wait for you. You have to go towards it because things are happening. And maybe you don't see them because it's a city that still a lot is happening behind under the surface. But it's a city that has a tremendous artistic life, cultural life, music scene. We were talking about jazz. I mean, it's a fantastic dynamic scene that is growing. And that's an indicator of a society that is just not waiting for the future to happen. It's a society that wants to be part of that future. Now, again, the importance of accompanying this effort, because it's not given, it's not to be taken for granted. We need to build that future. So for me, UB is a city that is changing. Of course, I have a concern for environmental protection. I have a concern when I go through winters, and this is already my second winter here, and I see the levels of air pollution, and I see how much children are suffering. I have a concern when I see the pace of urban, the concrete, the cement growing all over UB, and I have a concern for green areas and children's spaces. But this is part of all cities. All city goes through the same process of rapid growth and adjustment. We just need to be sure that growth goes with sustainability.
Yes. Now let's talk about the United Nations. United Nations have been working in Mongolia for 50 years.
Yes.
And if I remember correctly, UNICEF is working after the democracy in Mongolia.
Yes.
What is your biggest concern about children's rights in Mongolia?
You know, UNICEF has been working officially here since 1963. However, as an office, we have an office here in Mongolia starting from 1991. So we also accompany this important transition that Mongolia went through. You asked me about concern. I would answer in two ways. There is, if I look at data, let's look at the hard evidence, what data are telling us. My biggest concern is about the low indicators that we still have in access to water, clean water, and access to proper sanitation. This is an area where we can and we must do better. National average on access to sanitation is less than 60% of the population. National average in access to clean water, 64%. When it comes to rural area or certain IMACs, even lower. When it comes to poor population, much, much lower. So inequalities are there, especially in access to water and sanitation. This is a concern because this is a primary area for human development. Bad sanitation, lack of access to water brings to a lot of disease, brings to a lot of discrimination and deprivation. But the second part of my answer when you ask me about concern is a more general concern. It's the concern at the time where we are taking decisions. This is a time of elections, it's a time of commitments, it's a time where a decision will be taken and are being taken on the future of the nation. The concern is to ensure that the right priorities include the new generations. And again, this is the story I want to tell to our audience. At the time where Mongolia is projected towards the future, that future, to be successful, to be prosperous, has to build on human capital. Human capital are children, are adolescents, are the young people that will be the leaders of tomorrow, the laborers of tomorrow, the fathers and mothers in 10, 15, 20 years. But it starts now. So the importance of keeping children, adolescents as a key priority in the policy development, in the political discussion, a key priority, because future starts with them.
UNICEF's goal, or should I say mission, is to reach every child and protect their right.
Yes.
And ensure they reach their full potential. And speaking of Mongolia is a young country.
Right.
And young into democracy, it's been 26 years. And how do you think government is focusing on the children's right? And do you think government is implementing enough policy and laws and decisions?
You know, my answer is a clear yes, and let me elaborate on that. If I look at the last 26 years, 1990 today, indicators on children, have improved tremendously. Under 5 mortality, number of children who die before the age of 5 decreased almost 5 times since 1990. Since 1990, education rate became primary, almost universal. Stunting in nutrition, children that are nutritionally stunted, went down from 30 to 10%. So if we look at key indicators, tremendous progress. And that's leadership of the government, right decision over time. At the same time, also if I look at the present time, a lot of good things have happened. We just celebrated the adoption of the first child protection law, a new child protection law for Mongolia, tremendous achievement. So this is a government that cares for children and has shown this commitment over time. Mongolia was one of the first countries who ratified the Convention on the Rights of the Child. Now, does this mean the job is done? No. We still have what we call an unfinished agenda. We still have work to do to ensure that we move ahead towards a prosperous future with no more inequalities between rural and urban areas, between urban and the peri-urban Gar districts area. No more inequalities between rich and poor. So much has been accomplished, but there is still work to do, especially I would say on what is the equity agenda, which will be a strong test for the country in terms of going to the next generation with strong human capital.
Continuous improvement is always the key.
Absolutely.
Right? Yes.
Absolutely.
And Mongolia has been announced as a country with a medium income.
Yes.
And Mongolia has been developing rapidly in worldwide fast developing country. But before UNICEF and other international organizations used to lend the support, aid through medicines,
yes,
and
yes,
other things.
Yes.
But now, since the country is developing rapidly and there needs to be bigger scope of work, and that means the UNICEF and other international organizations needs to work with the government in policy making levels. So how is UNICEF cooperating with the Mongolian government currently?
You see, Biamba, you are touching on a very important question. Mongolia today is an upper middle income country, meaning that from a donor perspective, more and more donors are moving to countries that have more immediate needs. And of course, the donor priority have changed over time. Now, in the same way, UNICEF way of operating has changed. This is not a country that requires UNICEF to deliver service directly. There is a strong system in place at national level. It's not a country that requires UNICEF to distribute supplies or medicines, because there is a system in place. So UNICEF way of operating now is built on trying to provide the best technical assistance to help the development of policies, legislations, to improve the quality of the service provision, the quality of the systems to deliver services to population, but also to help generate the best possible data and analysis to understand the situation of children. If we don't understand correctly where priorities are, we cannot take the right decisions. Means also that we are engaged in the generation of knowledge, in production of studies and analysis with local national partners. UNICEF way of operating is made in two levels. One level is at central level, where we cooperate with a number of ministries, again in supporting this generation of policies, legislation, and the quality of services. But also we work at local level. This is very important with us, because we always say we want to be close to children, we want to be close to communities. The way we operate, however, is very strategic. We concentrate efforts in a few geographic areas where we pilot successful models of implementation of services. So we want to test models, and when we see that these models work, by evaluating them, by analyzing them, then we work with the government for replication at higher level, at higher scale. This is what we call pilot to policy approaches. And this, I can also elaborate more later, has given some good success. Now, what is important, though, is that we ensure that the government reflects children as a priority. What it means? Budget, for example. We all know that in times of macroeconomic readjustment, in macroeconomic crisis, like this is a difficult time from the economy, there is a risk of having social budgets cut. Well, the importance of safeguarding children as a budget category, as a budget priority. Safeguarding children as a priority in policy and legislation. And I see that, as I said, child protection law, strong priority of the government. The government just adopted a national strategy on maternal and child nutrition. Strong achievement, strong success. So we want to see this way of having children as a priority continuing over time. So this is the way we operate as a UNICEF. We support policy development, knowledge generation, but also we work locally to generate pilots that can be replicated. At the same time, we also open to other sectors of society, private sector. Very important. We work with the private sector. We have a partnership with the Chamber of Commerce, with the Business Council, simply because private sector is a partner of development. 75% of GDP comes from private sector. They are part of this challenge. They are part of this game for children, and we want to play with them.
What is the most memorable achievements done in Mongolia by the UNICEF?
Because we've been working here for a long time, but if I look, let me narrow down to the period I've been here, the last year and a half. I would say that probably, let me pick on three achievements quickly. One was having clearly replicable models that work for children. Sanitation in school, what we call the wash container. Sanitation unit that can provide school sanitation. In schools building, they don't have indoor sanitation. You know how important it is to have indoor sanitation. Or the girl kindergartens. We tested how important it is to have mobile kindergarten that can provide early childhood development services. So first achievement, to have a good set of models, and today we can tell our government partners, this works for children, this makes results, it can be scaled up. The second achievement, well, very concrete improvement in child indicators. Only this year versus 2015, 6% achievement in more early childhood education, more children in preschool, in kindergarten. 6% decrease in child mortality, newborn children. This is lives that have been saved working together with partners. The other achievement, a strong contribution, technical support to the child protection law. Today, Mongolia has a very advanced child protection law. Corporal punishment is banned by law in all settings. This is important because if we don't have a strong law, we cannot really change the way we all behave with children. So these are three key achievements that I would mention that UNICEF has accomplished in the recent couple of years.
There are two target areas, Malach and Huskul.
Right.
So why these specific two areas?
Well, this is the results of a very deliberate decision to be effective, to be strategic. You know, we are not a big office in terms of resources. We want to be strategic and ensure that we have the maximum results for our efforts. So we decided to concentrate efforts in two geographic areas, one rural, relatively remote, one peri-urban, to demonstrate scalable models of service delivery, scalable models of local planning for children. So the principle was not to disperse, not to dilute our resources, to have a highest impact. Now, why those two areas and not others? Because in the current country program, 5 years, 2012-2016, we look at indicators. And we saw that Huskul and Nalak, when we started, had some of the lowest indicators in terms of poverty, child development. So we decided to start from the two areas that could need our help, our assistance the most. But our intervention will not be limited in that. As we move towards the next country program, 2017-2021, we will open to new IMAX because now we have clearly scalable models, replicatable models to offer. So this is the reason why we had those two areas. And the great thing, Biamba, is that we can demonstrate that in those two areas, now local authorities have taken ownership. Let me give you one piece of information. In both areas, we have what we call a community-friendly, child-friendly community strategy in place. Those two IMACs are child-friendly, meaning that at government level, IMAC government, there are key principles, child-related principles, that have been included in local planning. There is a strategy officially adopted. But let me give you another indicator. Use of local development fund. You know how important for local communities is the LDF, as we say. In both areas, the use of LDF for children has dramatically increased between 2013 2015. Today in whole school, 22.5% of LDF is used for children. In NALAC, almost 30%. What does it mean? It means that governors and the local IMAC cabinet, they have children as a priority. So when it comes to LDF, it is used for repairing schools, kindergarten, ensuring early childhood development services, nutrition provision. So the priority focus has shifted towards children. And this goes beyond UNICEF. This is ownership that will remain even when we will move out from those IMACs and districts.
I believe the two replica models in Hupskol and Nalach will be successful, and the replica model will be transferred, moved to another IMAC.
Right.
To implement another project.
Exactly.
And you spoke of the current program from 2012 to 2016.
Yeah.
I believe it's equity.
Right. Yeah.
Can you elaborate a little more?
Well, is equity focused simply because we believe that equity is and will remain the key central pillar of development work in Mongolia, with and beyond the children. Why? Because this is a country that is growing, but when we unpack, when we disaggregate the national average, we see that inequalities are there and are important and sometimes are persisting over time. Inequalities again between rural and urban and peri-urban, rich and poor families. So the current program was strongly designed to bring those equity elements with evidence. So we produce data and studies. The next country program will be even more, in a more stronger way, focused on targeting those inequalities, what we call narrowing gaps. Narrowing gaps, ensuring that equity is achieved for children. So we will focus on key areas where inequalities are still the widest. Access to water, access to sanitation, access to preschool education, access to nutritional services, or access to child protection services. These are some of the elements where inequalities are the highest. But we will also start working on something new. We will open new areas of work where UNICEF hasn't traditionally engaged.
What is next for UNICEF? Let's just say in the next 2-3 years?
Right. This is actually a critical time because we just finished designing the next 5-year program, 2017-2021. So what's next? Well, let me tell in one sentence what is the story of the next 5 years. The story is narrowing inequalities for children and investing in the new generation as a foundation for human capital and sustainable growth. This is our story. Countries growing, economic growth is important. We know that there cannot be sustainable economic growth without human capital. We know that from worldwide experience. We also know that human capital means getting children in school with quality education, building and developing skills, but also having children healthy, having adolescents healthy, having children protect them from violence and harm. So this is why the next 5 years we'll have one component of narrowing inequalities. We will keep on working to close those gaps that are still there in the area that I mentioned. But the second pillar will be to invest in high return areas. Children are an investment. If there is one sentence that I'd like for our audience to remember is this: children is an area of social investment with the highest return. Early childhood education, the critical period of children when they are very young, where the brain is developing. If we miss that window, children will not reach the maximum potential they can have as adults. We want to invest in those high return areas: early childhood education, adolescence development, but also protection of children. We have concern on the rise of sexually transmitted infections in Mongolia. This is an area that we want to address. We are concerned with the impact of air pollution on children, so we want to work to mitigate that impact that is still there. So keep on working on building equity for children while also opening new areas. Impact of climate change, working with the private sector on corporate social responsibility. We have some very good example of private sector partners. They start working to support our models for replication. So this will be the story for the next 5 years, to accompany the governments towards economic growth, toward prosperity, by ensuring that children are an area of investment, the new generation can be educated, protected, and healthy.
You know, in developing countries, child labor is one of the issues,
Yeah.
and Mongolia has lots of children out there doing a labor. What's your position on this issue?
Well, you know, it is a sad reality all over the world, and including in Mongolia. There are still too many children that are engaged in hazardous exploitation, labor exploitation. Let me be very clear. There is a legislation in place. Mongolia has ratified international conventions. There is a legislation that sets a minimum age, and there is a legislation that also prohibits what is dangerous work, child work. And we know that a lot of work where children are engaged is dangerous, is unacceptable under all standards. So we just need to implement the law and have a mechanism to monitor, inspect, and sanctions those that employ children, but also support economically those families where children work out of necessity. So we need also to have this mix of law enforcement, but also family support and alternatives for children. The best place for a child is the school. This is why it's important to get all children to school, because education is the most important preventive way for child labor. So what I say around is areas that still need response. There are still too many children working, especially in the informal economy. But also we have a legislation in place, we have a system in place. We just need a strong call for action and an investment in education as a preventive measure.
There are lots of issues from parents that saying that the elementary school, the children are getting too much homework and they don't get to socialize and they don't develop personalities. So how does other Western countries solve this issue, and how can Mongolia solve this?
You know, it's interesting because if we look at high-performing countries, these are all countries that invested heavily in education. You know, I always study, for example, the South Korean model. South Korean model is very telling. I mean, among other elements of good economic policy or policies in general, the investment in education was crucial for the success of the country. But balance is the key. Children, they need education as a priority element to develop, but they also need socialization. They also need group works. They also need leisure. Children have a right to leisure, to free time, to enjoy. So the most important thing is that all this is made in a balanced way, but with a look at the future. For children to develop, education and life skills development is paramount, is fundamental. What is also important is that they have this group dimension, they have this participation. In modern society, what I see around is children are more and more alone. This is true all over. I mean, I spent most of my childhood in the street playing with the neighborhood kids. It was fantastic. I played with other children in the children movement, in the Scouts. Today, probably children, they spend a long time in front of their smartphone or television. What I'm saying is that there are risks in modern society. So the most important thing is that we invest in education, we invest in getting children protected from any danger, but we don't lose sight of this group space, this collective space, where children are simply with other peers. They play, they spend time together. This balance is very important. We don't want children to be just technologically savvy or technological experts, but alienated from the rest of society. And I think that Mongolia has a lot of advantage in this because it's the country that has a deep respect for nature and the open space. Children love animals and love spending time in the open, love spending time in the nature. This is one of the best ways to grow in a balanced way. We just need to be sure that we don't lose that. Yes, technology is important, but balance and contact with nature and contact with peers is even more important.
In Mongolia, divorced parents, especially fathers, do not pay child support, and I believe there have been similar issues in other countries. And how did they solve this issue, and how can Mongolia government look into this matter and take care of it?
Divorce is certainly one of the most difficult, if not literally one of the most difficult elements and times in a family life. And we need to be very serious in the way we protect children. And there are principles that are very clearly defined and also accepted in the Mongolian legislation, the best interest of the child and the responsibility of parents to ensure children, but also to ensure that the one parent that will still be the one bearing the financial burden of the child, the one that will keep the legal care of the child. Now, legislation in there, my first answer is we just need to apply and enforce the court order in terms of child support. And the parents that is asked to provide child support has to provide it. The problem is that the principle many times is just not enforced or applied or sanctioned. So it's also a call to ensure that those principles are properly sanctioned if they are not respected. On the other hand, is also to ensure that we develop those programs of family support that can help ease the financial burden on families. Let's not forget that this is a difficult time for the economy, and many families are struggling, and many single parents are struggling, and maybe they are not in a position to provide the family support needed. So in that case, then we need to support them with financial assistance. So it's also a call to ensure that financial assistance programs, again, are protected in a time of budgetary difficulty, in a time where the government is struggling because of the global and national economic crisis. Let's not forget those parents that have a responsibility to provide for child support. But also when it comes to divorced parents, let's not also forget the psychological support. It's not only about providing the financial means for livelihood, it's also to accompany parents to ensure that that child, those children can still have the love, the affection they can need and they can deserve.
I'll leave the last moment for you. Please add anything that I missed to ask.
Well, I think that there are two messages that I'd like to conclude with. One message is a message of optimism, but it's not only the optimism of the heart, of the passion for being in Mongolia, for working for children, it's the optimism that comes from evidence. This is a country that is looking towards the future, is a country that has a tremendous potential. It is important that this potential is translated into benefits, support for children. So it's a message of being confident that together this is a country that can write a history of a page of success in development. It's a small population country with resources, and there are all the elements, the ingredients to be a successful story for children. The second and final message is a call for action. This is a time where decisions are made for development in Mongolia. We just have a new, very well-written development vision for Mongolia, 2016-2030. The country is looking towards the future. The new generation has to remain a priority for policy and political decision. New generation are instrumental to build a human capital that will serve economic growth, that will make economic growth sustainable. And human capital starts again with children. So my message is to decision makers, to society at large, let's keep the new generation as a priority, as an area of social investment, because that's the best way to ensure a bright and prosperous future for Mongolia.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your time. This was Mr. Roberto Benes, UNICEF country representative in Mongolia. Thank you for watching. This was Gogo Mongolia.